Some people think this car is smart and quite different, while others believe it's rather ugly. But regardless of what you personally think, it's a super practical and highly functional mini electric car, which, however, in some areas seem a bit dated. In this video, I go through the car both inside and out, and as always, I take a closer look at the built-in software, because in my opinion, it's one of the most important components in any modern car, and something that can be difficult to assess on a short test drive at the dealer. There will also be another video where I take the car out on both the highway and the country road to test another thing that can be difficult to assess on a short test drive, namely the assistance systems. That is, how good it is at adapting to speed, identifying the lane, and helping to steer for you. In that video, I will also give my overall conclusion, so remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. If you compare the Hyundai Inster with another mini electric car launched this year, namely the Renault 5, I think most people will agree that the Renault is somewhat smarter to look at. But looks aren't everything, as they say, and although I also think Inster is a bit ugly, I can also see that it has some qualities that Renault lacks. On the other hand, there are also a number of areas where Renault is simply far ahead. Now, it's not because this video is supposed to be a comparison between the Inster and the Renault 5, but since they are two cars in the same class and are also quite close in price, I think it is obvious to look at some of the differences because, in my opinion, they are aimed at two very different drivers. But let's start by taking a closer look at the Hyundai Inster. The Inster is available in both a standard and a long-range model. The standard model has a 42 kilowatt-hour battery, a 97 horsepower engine, and a WLTP range of 327 kilometers. Prices start at around 180,000 Danish kroner. The long-range model has a 49 kilowatt-hour battery, a 115 horsepower engine, and a WLTP range of 370 kilometers. Prices for the long range start at 192,000 Danish kroner. Both models are available in two trim levels, Essential and Advanced, and the long range model is also available in a special cross version that looks a little more off-road-like. It comes as standard with 17-inch wheels and roof rails, which reduces the range from 370 to 335 kilometers. Both the standard and long-range versions of the Advanced are also available in a 5-seater version, that is, with 3 seats in the back. At the time this video was recorded, Hyundai was running a promotion where they had lowered the price by 10,000 kroner on all models, but I don't know if that price will eventually become permanent or not. I've added a Google link in the description so you can find your own local prices and information and dive deeper into the differences between the various trim levels. The model I've borrowed is the long-range version of the Advanced with the winter package and the parking package. The winter package adds a heat pump and a battery heater, and the parking package adds emergency braking for reversing, a 360-degree camera, and a blind spot assistant. There's also a parking package plus, which for 2,500 kroner more gives you the option to use your phone or your smartwatch as a key. But I haven't had the chance to test that. The Hyundai Inster is front-wheel drive and doesn't have a frunk, but on the other hand, the charging port is in a bit of a funny spot. It's located right here at the front of the car. And that's actually quite practical because when you need to pull up to a charger that's by a curb, you can just swing right in and don't have to spend time backing the car in first. That's why I also like it when the charging port is on the right front fender, because it has the same advantage. And it also means you can easily charge at Tesla's version 3 Superchargers, which there are a lot of, both around Denmark and throughout Europe. But I was a bit curious to see if this location would also work at the Superchargers, because the charging station has to be on the right side of the car, and they have pretty short cables. I know they can reach the front fender, but can they reach all the way over here? So I checked that out, and luckily, well, they can actually reach. As long as you drive the car nice and close to the charger, you can get the cable over here. And that means the Inster, just like cars that have the charging port on the right front fender, can charge at all chargers without any problems, including Tesla's version 3 Superchargers. So that's pretty cool. I mentioned the Renault 5 earlier. It actually has its charging port on the left front fender. And you can't really use it at the Superchargers, so that's something to be aware of if you were thinking of doing that. The trunk here in the Hyundai Inster isn't very big. There's this very minimalist parcel shelf. I'll just try to take it out here so you can get a better look inside. As you can see, not a huge amount of space. But the Inster has a little trick that lets you increase the trunk capacity to 351 litres. That's about 25 litres more than the Renault 5 has in that configuration. If you fold the seats down, the capacity is 1,059 litres. That's about 50 litres less than the Renault 5. A very cool thing when you fold the seats down is that you get a completely flat floor, so it's super nice for transporting things and getting them in and out. But if you want those 351 litres, well, you have to sacrifice something, and I'll show you that in a moment. There are no power outlets or other outlets here in the trunk, but there is some extra space underneath. Unfortunately, there's this rubber mat, so it's a bit difficult to get to that space because there isn't really a handle on this rubber mat. There's a flap that kind of goes down past where the handle actually is. But if I lift this up, well, I actually have a pretty big space down here where I could also put my charging cable. But it's a bit tricky with these flaps, so if you have this rubber mat in the back, you just have to be aware that it's a bit difficult to get under here. The trick I mentioned before that can expand the trunk from 238 to 351 litres takes place here in the back seat. If we just start with the space back here, as you can see it's relatively minimalist. There are no USB ports or anything like that. We saw that in the Renault 5 as well. On the other hand, there's a lot of space. I'm sitting here behind myself. I'm only 1.72 meters tall, but just look at how much space there is here between me and the front seat. I can even recline the back seat a bit so I can lean back and have this sort of lounge-like feeling back here. An incredible amount of space in such a small car, but that does come at the expense of that trunk space. What's smart about the Inster is that I have the option to choose for myself. Do I want a lot of space in the back seat and not so much space in the trunk? Or would I rather have a larger trunk on par with the Renault 5? But then I lose some space back here because I can actually grab down here and then I can slide the back seat all the way forward. Then the space is more like what you find in the back seat of the Renault 5. So that's where this extra back seat space comes from. But I actually think it's quite smart that I can choose whether I need trunk space or back seat space. I can't do that in the Renault 5. It always has a larger trunk, but in turn, you never get more space for the back seat passengers than what's available here. But in the Inster, well, I can have plenty of space in the back, and 2 adults can easily sit here, even though it's a small car. There's also plenty of space here in the front seat of the Hyundai Inster. The car is narrow but relatively tall, so I have plenty of headroom up to the ceiling, and it doesn't feel like a small car when I'm sitting up here in the front. I have my main display here, and then I have one of a similar size here in front of the driver's seat, where I have my speedometer and driving assistance and so on. On the steering wheel, I have real physical buttons, both scroll wheels and buttons all the way around. I have my drive mode button down here, and my gear selector is on this stalk over here on the side, underneath the steering wheel. It actually works really well once you get used to it. Over here on the left side, well, I have the usual window up and down buttons, and I can adjust my side mirrors, and I can lock and unlock the doors. Under the large display, I can control my air conditioning, my climate control, and I also have direct shortcuts to a number of functions within the software. I'll show you that a little later when I go through the software in the car, but it's pretty cool with so many physical buttons. There are also physical buttons here for the heated seats and to activate the parking camera and so on. So probably the largest number of physical buttons I've seen in an electric car in a long time, and I actually think that's very nice because, let's face it, it just works a little better and is a little safer to drive with than having to go in and find some touch target on a screen. So I think that's a really good choice by Hyundai. Over here on the side, I have some storage space, and I also have 2 USB ports, a USB-A and a USB-C port, and a traditional 12-volt outlet. And I'll come back to those when we talk about the software because there's some integration there that's a bit special. Down here in this model, I have an inductive charger for my phone. I have some extra storage space down here. Here I have 2 cup holders and then this little armrest here, but it actually works quite well, and I can flip it away if I don't want it. And then there's a small, simple detail between the cup holders here, which I think is pretty cool, because I always drive with my phone. In our car, we have wireless Apple CarPlay, so I'm always wondering, where should I put my phone? In my pocket or somewhere else? Sometimes I want to have it out. Well, there's simply a holder where I can just pop it in, and then it stands there and doesn't slide around. And I actually think that's very smart if I don't want to have it lying on the charger. So, a smart little simple analog solution for that. The materials are not exactly luxurious, it's hard plastic pretty much everywhere, but that's probably okay in a car that starts at 180,000 kroner. The seat materials are fine, they are comfortable to sit in, and the steering wheel is very nice to hold, so that's basically fine. Alright, but we also need to look at one of the most important things here in the cabin, namely the car's software. I have my main screen up here in front, and as I showed earlier, there are some physical buttons under the screen, where I have direct access to, for example, a switch to the map view, which is here. I can switch over to the navigation views. I have a user-definable button, which I'll come back to in a moment. I can change the track or radio station. I can switch directly to the radio by clicking a button. I can switch to my media settings, and I can press Setup, and then I get into the car's main menu. But it's actually pretty cool to have physical buttons for direct access to the most important functions on the screen, including a user-defined button. Let's start from one end. Up here I have my vehicle settings, and here I can go in and adjust the settings for the various driver assistants. I have something called operational mode here, which I'm actually a bit unsure about. There's an eco setting, and then it says that when changing the operational mode, a picture of the vehicle and detailed information is shown. But I don't really know how to change the operational mode in here, because if I go into the eco menu, I can just choose active climate control and then a notification on change. But whether that means when I switch to eco mode or what, I'm actually a bit unsure. It doesn't really give much of an explanation here, but it's there at least. Then I have my instrument panel. Well, here I can go in and change the brightness, and I have the option to go in and set a theme for the driver instrument cluster, meaning the one that's here in front of me as the driver. I have a modern one called Cube, which has these two digital cubes that are animating and look very futuristic. So if you're into that slightly more modern setting or a more modern design, you can choose that one. But you also have a classic theme, which is a bit more retro style. And it looks like this. There are 3 different designs, and I can choose to have them either change when I switch drive modes, because there's one for each of the 3 drive modes: normal, eco, and sport. Or if there's one of them I like the best, I can just choose to have it always use that one. This one here is the design for normal drive mode. This one is for sport mode. And this one is for eco mode. So as I said, I can set it to switch between them or just choose one to use. And it's actually pretty cool that I have the option of 4 different designs on my screen here, even though 3 of them are very similar. It's mostly the colors that have been changed. For further settings, I can go in and adjust various things related to my climate control. For example, in here under recirculation, I have the option that when I activate the windshield washer fluid on the front windshield, it turns on recirculation so that I don't get as much of the washer fluid smell inside the cabin, and then it turns it off again when I'm done using the windshield washers. It's actually quite smart that I can activate that. I also have the option to go in and adjust various lights, how my cabin lighting should be, how many times the comfort blinker should flash, and so on and so forth. I can choose whether the doors should lock automatically, and I can go in and set some other comfort settings. In the EV menu, I have the option to set how much the car should charge to, meaning how high a state of charge it should reach, both during DC charging and AC charging. And for both of them, I can choose either 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, or 100% state of charge. Under AC charging current, I can choose whether it should charge with the full 11 kilowatts of AC charging, or if it should charge at a slightly reduced rate. This is also where I can choose whether it should precondition the battery. And then it has something they call utility mode, which works a bit like a kind of camp mode. The description says that it ensures the infotainment system and the cabin lighting can stay on for a longer time if, for example, you're taking longer breaks or you're camping. Under navigation, I have the settings for my navigation. For example, whether it should show the vehicle's speed on the map screen, if I want traffic information, how the guidance should be, whether it should show speed cameras, various settings for the map, and so on and so forth. All sorts of typical map settings for a navigation system, I have them in here. Under sound, I can choose if the volume should change with the car's speed. I can control the panning in the cabin. I have a simple equalizer. I can choose if the driving guidance, meaning navigation messages and so on, should lower the volume of other sounds. And then it has something called noise control, which is apparently a kind of noise reduction for the radio. I haven't actually seen that before, but I guess it's nice that you have that option as well. Under device connection, this is where you can manage the connection of Bluetooth devices, for example, your phone. And then down here, there's something called phone projection settings. That's basically just Android Auto and Apple CarPlay that you can activate. But there's one thing here in the Inster that's a bit old-fashioned, because it only works via a cable. A lot of new electric cars have wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. That also applies to the Renault 5, which we've talked about a couple of times, but you don't have that here in the Inster. But that's not the dumbest part. I mentioned earlier that I would get back to these USB ports that are up here in the front of the car. There's both a USB-A and a USB-C port, but the USB-C port is only for charging. If you want to use a phone with Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, well, then it has to be connected to the USB-A port. The thing is, all newer phones come with a USB-C cable, not a USB-A cable. In fact, no phones in the last 7 years have been delivered with a USB-A cable. Even iPhones, in the years they used Lightning, they only switched to USB-C 2 years ago. Well, in the years before that, they were still delivered with a USB-C cable. That means if you have a phone that came with a USB-A cable, it's so old that it can't be updated anymore. So why on earth would you use a USB-A port to connect the phone to the car? It makes no sense, because it actually means that everyone who wants to connect their phone to the car has to go out and buy a USB-A to USB-C or a USB-A to Lightning cable, depending on their phone, because that cable didn't come with it. And it's not just any cable, because you can't use a regular charging cable. It has to be a cable that can also handle data. It just seems completely archaic and foolish. If they wanted to have 2 different ports, USB-A and USB-C, then the USB-C port should be the one that connects the car's system to the phone, and the USB-A port should be used only for charging if you have some old devices. Well, if I go further in the menu, I have some profile settings. Here I can create some different driver profiles. I have voice recognition, I'll get back to that in a moment. Under theme and layout, well, I can choose what the car's info screen should look like when it's in sleep mode, whether it should show an analog or digital clock, or nothing at all. I can also choose the theme for the instrument panel down here. That's what we saw earlier, it's just another way to access it. Under screen, I can adjust the brightness of the screen. I can set different settings for the camera, which lines I want to see on the rear view camera. And I can turn on a blue light filter so it reduces blue light if I'm driving at night. I don't know how much it works or how much it helps, but it's pretty cool that it's there. And yeah, that's basically what I can do in here. Then I have a menu here called Button, and it's for this custom button, which is both below the display and also here on the steering wheel. There are 2 different ones, and I have settings for both of them. For the button that's among the buttons under the display, I can choose for it to activate the phone projection. That basically just means it should switch to Apple CarPlay or Android Auto if I have a phone connected. So if I'm somewhere else in the car's system and I want to quickly get back to, for example, Apple CarPlay, well, I can set that, and then I just press that star button and it opens Apple CarPlay. Super cool. I can also set it to various other things. And the same goes for the button on the steering wheel. I have some other settings there that are perhaps a bit more relevant on the steering wheel. I can cancel my route, I can turn off the radio, that is mute, or I can go to the EV screen or to the driver assistance settings. So it's super cool that you have some customizations here. There's also a mode button on the steering wheel that switches between different modes in the car, and I can also go in and set which modes it should switch between. So I can either select all of them, or I can select a few, and then it switches between the ones that are selected. Also really nice. And a couple of other steering wheel buttons, arrow up and down over here on the right side, well, I can also choose whether it should switch between my favorites on the radio, for example, or if it should just switch between all stations on the radio. So it's really nice that you have some different customization options so you can set it up just the way you want it. Bluelink is the system that Hyundai uses to communicate with your app if you have an app connected to the car. For example, to unlock the car and to get route information, traffic information, and so on in the navigation. And what's really cool is that all newer Hyundais, actually the ones being delivered here in 2025 and later, they actually come with 10 years of Bluelink. That means you don't have to pay anything for this for the next 10 years. There are some advanced versions of Bluelink that have a few more features. You can also buy some music services for it or something like that. But the basic functionality, it isn't just included for 1 year or for 3 years, it's actually included for 10 years. You can see in here it says it doesn't expire until 2035. So it's actually really nice that it's included so you don't suddenly find yourself after a few years having to pay for the same functionality you had when you bought the car. That's super good and really nice. Last but not least, under General, I can see which version the car is running. I don't know what operating system this is based on, but you can at least see the versions here if you get a car and want to see if it has newer software than the one I've been looking at here. And it's also in here that you can get other system info, set the clock, whether it should do it automatically, switch to daylight saving time, and set the language. So those were all the settings in here, but the last thing we need to look at is of course the navigation, because that's a pretty essential part of an electric car. If I go into the map app, I have a search button down here. And here I can enter my desired destination. Let's start by searching for a point of interest, some well-known place, and see if the car can figure it out. I always try to search for the Opera House. I'll just do it with the buttons here, and then we'll check out the voice assistant afterwards. I'll type the Opera House here. And it says Opera in the middle, the Opera Copenhagen. I bet it's that one. It found it just fine. Equipage Mestavai 10 or 6. It's both of them, probably just two different entrances, but let's just choose the first one here. Then it goes and finds a route. It creates both a recommended and a fast route. I can actually go in and choose which route options it should give me, and in this case, well, it's basically the same route, and I've also asked it to include charging stations. If I don't do anything, it just starts, and then we're on our way. Here, I can't immediately see what my state of charge will be on arrival, that is, my final state of charge when I reach my destination, but it is in here. I just have to press down here, and then I can see that in this case, I'll arrive with 22%. I actually have 33% state of charge on the battery right now. So that's super nice that I can actually see, okay, I can make it to the Opera House. I can't see what I'd come back with if I were to return, like you can in the Android automotive system in the Renault 5 Techno models and above. But I can at least see what I'll arrive with. And that's really, really nice because typically you can see how much range you have, but that's based on how you've been driving recently, so you can't always rely on it. And that can be a bit difficult, especially if you're new to EVs and you're thinking, okay, I have 33%. What does that mean? Well, here it actually tells me that if I drive now, I'll arrive with about 22%. So that's really nice because then I know I have enough, and I can calculate that I've used 11%, so I can probably make it home again too. That's really great. Let's try to set a slightly longer route where I might need some charging stops. I'll cancel my route by pressing here. Then the route guidance is cancelled. It's just thinking for a moment. Then I can say search again, and now I'll try to search for the Eiffel Tower. There are no Danish letters down here, so I'll just try searching without them. It couldn't figure that out. You know what? Let's just try typing Paris. It can definitely figure that one out. We'll take some address here in Paris, Rue du Parc Royal. That's probably down in Paris. It says it's 1,039 kilometers. I'm guessing that's right. I'll say add destination, and then it goes in and calculates a route for me. Now it's thinking for a bit, and I will say, when it has to make these slightly longer routes, it does take a little time. I'll just let it run so you can see how long it takes to plan a route of just over 1,000 kilometers down to Paris. I think that's a bit too slow, but okay. It's not the world's fastest system, and of course it's also a cheap car. It's a bit faster in the Renault 5 again, I'm sorry to say, but that's also a Google system of course, so it's a bit better. Well, anyway. It has now added some charging stops for me, I can see. It has a recommended route, so let's just choose that one. I can select down here, not start guidance as one word, there's a space missing. It's start guidance, meaning start route guidance. Yeah, a small detail, it confused me at first. I thought, what kind of start guidance? Well, anyways, it has created the route, and if I click down here, I can see my different charging stops. It has actually added charging stops for me. It has added one here already in 15 kilometers because, as I said, I don't have much charge on the car right now. And, well, then it has also added some others, but it hasn't added any further than the next 466 kilometers. So I'm guessing it must add more along the way? Unfortunately, I have no control over which charging providers it chooses. I can't go in and click on one of them here and change it. I also can't see information about this charging stop, for example, are there places to eat there, or other things that you can see in Android Automotive, which is in the Renault 5. So the information I have here is very sparse. But what actually annoys me the most with this function is that I can't go in and decide which charging providers it chooses. Because if you're on a long trip, I know this is a small car, it might not be designed for long trips. But again, the Renault 5 can do it, and you can definitely also go on long trips in a small car. I've done it twice in a Fiat 500e. Well, what's annoying about not being able to choose your own charging providers is that typically, when you drive south, you want to use certain providers that you might have a subscription with, so you know you'll pay a reasonably consistent and good price for charging. Because if you just use any random charging provider, you can end up paying a lot per kilowatt hour. I have that option in the Google-based system in the Renault 5, but I don't have that option here. I can't go in and decide anything about which chargers it chooses, and I also can't go in and swap out any chargers along the way or get more information about them. So it's mediocre at best. I think you should expect the car to be able to plan charging stops for you, and it can do that, but that's about it. It's not a super advanced system, unfortunately. And then you might say, well, I'm not driving south. It's not a long-distance car, so it doesn't really matter. Well, yes, but let's say we're going to drive to Jutland, for example. That could also be a possibility. So I'll just go in and cancel this route guidance again. It's just thinking for a moment. And then I'll go in and say here, well, I want to drive to Aarhus. We'll just take Aarhus City Hall here, that one. So now it's creating a route for me, and I'll say, I want to go there. Drive to Aarhus. It's thinking for a bit. It can see I don't have enough range, so it's going to go in and add some charging stops for me. And it's thinking, and it's thinking. Yeah, I'm getting a little impatient with this. I don't think you should have to wait too long for the computer, but now it's here at least. And the start guidance, no. We'll start the guidance, yes please. And then I'll go in and take a look. Well, it has added some charging stops. It has added a Circle K, an EDF, and an EON charger. What if I have a Clever subscription? If I have a Clever One subscription because I drive a lot in my daily life, then I'd want to charge at Clever. It hasn't chosen a single Clever charger, and I have no way to go in and select a Clever charger, or a Norlys charger, or whoever else I might have a subscription with. It just picks the random chargers it finds, and that's simply not good enough. It's really annoying that you can't do that. I will say, a lot of other electric cars also don't have many options when it comes to choosing a charging provider. Many of the ones I've tested, for example, all the MEB cars, so Volkswagen, Skoda, the Ford Explorer, they only have two options, Ionity and then their own charging network. So it's not that this is super catastrophic, it's just incredibly annoying. And as I said, the Renault 5's Android Automotive Google-based system is one of the best you can get. So if you're going on a long trip, if you need planning, it's definitely worth considering when we're talking about the software. And then there was that voice assistant. I primarily use the voice assistant for navigation, and that's because instead of sitting here and typing on the screen, addresses and so on, it's much faster to just press the button and say, navigate to the Opera or navigate to Hirschholm Main Street 32 or whatever it might be. But you can't do that here. Just watch what happens when I try to use it. Navigate to Aarhus.
Please repeat your last command.
Navigate to Aarhus.
Sorry, I didn't understand that. You can say commands to see the voice commands.
Commands.
Below are some available commands. On this screen, voice commands are not recognized.
Well, so it shows me here what I can do. I can search for a destination where it can say, go home, office, previous destinations. That means I can't choose a random destination. I can only choose things that are already programmed into the system, like home or the office, for example, or some places I've been to recently, and then I can choose from a list. I can also search for contacts, so I can call a specific person, but I can't navigate to a specific person. So it's a very, very limited voice function in here. In fact, I don't think I can control anything either. Let's just try and see here. I can change a route and resume one. I can control my radio and media, and I can switch mobile devices. But I can't, for example, say, turn on the seat heating.
Sorry, I didn't understand that.
It can't do that either. So I'd say it's almost pointless because it can do so little that it's not really worth using for anything. I don't find those functions particularly useful. And other systems can do significantly more. Again, I'm sorry to mention the Renault 5 again, but that's just a Google-based system. It's one of the best assistants you can get. It can do everything. But, I mean, other cars that can't do as much as that one, they can usually also control things in the car, like setting a specific temperature on the climate control or turning on the seat heating or things like that. But this one can't do that either. So it's really, really the most minimalistic voice assistant or voice command function there is. That's just how it is. So why would you choose a Hyundai Inster instead of a Renault 5? Because there can actually be cases where it makes sense. I'll get into that in my overall conclusion, which is coming in the next video, where I also test the driving assistance in the Inster here. That is, how good it is at keeping a distance, adjusting the speed, and keeping the car centered in the lane. And when that video is released, you can watch it by clicking right up there. If you're already curious about the Renault 5, you can see the first part of my test by clicking down there. And otherwise, I just hope you'll subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. See you soon.